All right, today we are diving into a pretty wild academic paper. It's one that promises to completely flip our understanding of political history on its head. So forget everything you think you know about policy or economics. We're about to get into the real science of British prime ministers. For decades, how we look at history has been shaped by this one simple idea. It's from Prime Minister Harold Macmillan. When someone asked him what really blows a government off course, he famously replied, "Events, dear boy, events." Well, according to the research we're looking at today, that's a terrible way to understand history. In fact, it's not just a little off, it's completely, fundamentally wrong. Okay, so let's get into this. The authors of this paper argue that, for centuries, we've been looking at all the wrong things. Boring stuff like the Industrial Revolution or the fall of the empire. They're saying we've missed the actual thing driving everything forward, the science of vibes. So this is their central thesis, and you gotta hear this. It's called the hydrodynamic theory of Westminster. And what it says is that a prime minister isn't really a person at all. Nope, they're more like a vessel, a ship, just trying to navigate what the paper calls the river of vibes. I mean, that's a whole new way of looking at leadership, right? Now you might be asking, okay, but how on earth do you measure vibes? Well, the paper's got an answer for that. They've developed a new methodology called the Retrospective Phrenology Index, or RPI. And this isn't just guesswork, oh no. It's a very rigorous approach. It involves quantitative analysis of old oil paintings using, and I am quoting here, the Adobe Photoshop Lasso tool. And check this out. This slide shows one of their key metrics, the Scrabble value metric. The theory is that the Scrabble score of a prime minister's last name directly tells you their style of governing. So you take Pitt, low score of 6. That suggests he's agile, lightweight. Then you have Palmerston at 14, which implies a much heavier style, more suited for gunboat diplomacy. The paper even games out a hypothetical PM, Cholmondeley Warner, with a massive score of 38, who would possess what they call sun-destroying nominative mass. So let's see how these wild new metrics actually work in practice. The paper takes a fresh look at the 19th century and argues that the real political fights weren't about policy at all. They were about neckcloths and beards. For example, Lord Liverpool, he was prime minister for 15 years. Traditional history says, oh, he was a great political operator. But this research, it chalks up his long run entirely to his hair. The paper literally includes a formula suggesting his hair had, and again I'm quoting, the structural integrity of reinforced concrete. Apparently, that just terrified the working classes into obedience. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. The paper uses a deep learning AI to analyze the famous rivalry between Disraeli and Gladstone. Turns out, it wasn't about conservatism versus liberalism. It was the follicle wars. Disraeli's imperial goatee, they claim, acted as a radio antenna so he could get instructions from ghosts. Meanwhile, Gladstone's mutton chops of moral rectitude acted like blinders and created a gravity field so powerful it literally slowed down time, which is why the Victorian era felt so long. Okay, moving into the 20th century, the tools of power had to change. The paper argues that as hats went out of style, prime ministers needed a whole new toolkit. And this led to the rise of cigars, helmets, and, according to the data, vampires. And that brings us to Winston Churchill and a concept the researchers call the rotundity principle. This is a biophysical theory. The idea is that a prime minister's political stability can be directly managed just by strategically distributing their weight. So that cigar Churchill always had? According to this principle, it wasn't a habit. No way. It was a crucial piece of government machinery. It was a load-bearing gyroscope. By clamping it right in the center of his jaw, it kept his political center of gravity stable, stopping him from tipping too far left or right. They also argue the smoke created a literal fog of war in the cabinet room. The paper then just rapid-fire addresses a bunch of other 20th century anomalies. First up, Clement Attlee. Ever notice how he looks grayscale even in color photos? Well, that's explained by the vampiric welfare theory. He apparently sucked all the color out of Britain to build the National Health Service. Then you've got Margaret Thatcher, whose hairspray created a helmet so hard it made her totally immune to falling coal prices. And finally, the Blair-Brown government is reframed as a quantum superposition. Blair was the light photon, Brown the heavy baryon, and when they finally split in 2007, it caused the financial crash. And all of this leads us right up to the modern era, which the paper basically frames as a period of incredibly fast decay, like a political half-life that's speeding up. They call it the era of entropy. The main case study for this, of course, is Boris Johnson. The research presents what it calls the chaos theory of governance, and it claims there is a direct one-to-one link between how messy his hair is and how messy government policy is. His decision-making process, they found, was basically indistinguishable from a bingo cage filled with Latin phrases. But this might be the most powerful piece of data in the whole study. They call it the truss lettuce singularity. For 49 days, the paper actually tracked the decay of an iceberg lettuce and compared it to the political capital of the Truss administration. And if you just look at the timeline here, you can see it clearly. By day 49, the lettuce had held on to its structural integrity for longer than the UK economy. So what about the current Prime Minister, Keir Starmer? Well, the paper's initial analysis is revealing. It suggests he's made of a proprietary material they call competent beige. Now, while this material dramatically lowers the risk of a national heart attack, the authors do warn it could lead to a state of national narcolepsy, where the whole country just kind of fades away from a sheer lack of drama. Okay, so after all of this, the Scrabble scores, the concrete hair, the lettuce, what does it all mean? Where is this going? Well, the paper pulls it all together into one grand unifying theory, the silly hat solution. All right, let's break this down, because this is the big finale. The silly hat theory is the paper's incredible conclusion. It says that British power is directly proportional to the height and the absurdity of whatever hat the prime minister is wearing. The empire grew under tall hats, and it collapsed when prime ministers stopped wearing hats completely. This, they say, left their brains vulnerable to something called cosmic ray interference. And this isn't just some abstract idea. The authors offer a very clear three-step plan to fix all of the country's problems. Step 1. Just stop all policymaking immediately. Step 2, reintroduce mandatory wigs for everyone in the cabinet. In step 3, the big one, insulate the executive brain from the atmosphere. That's how you stabilize the pound. Which really leaves us with just one final, pretty provocative question posed by this revolutionary piece of research. In an age of all these complex global challenges, is it possible we've overlooked the simplest solution all along? Could mandatory wigs really save the economy?